My billionaire husband said I'd be nothing without him, then tried to steal everything, unaware I'd turned his allowance into millions and uncovered 40 years of family secrets. He stripped me of my name, my identity, and nearly my sanity, believing I was nothing more than a trophy. He had no idea I was quietly building an empire from the crumbs he threw my way, preparing for the day I'd watch his own crumble. Then, a secret handed to me by his former assistant laid bare not just his deceit, but generations of family lies, changing everything. It was just shy of midnight on a Tuesday when I carefully placed my house keys on the gleaming marble counter of the $6 million penthouse. I watched Julian Thorne's face morph into an expression I'd never witnessed before. It went utterly blank. Not anger, not sorrow, just an empty canvas, like a television screen that had lost its signal. "You wouldn't survive a week without me, Elara," Julian had declared barely 20 minutes earlier, swirling his single malt like a character in a bad movie. "Without my wealth, you are utterly insignificant." My hand instinctively went to my designer bag, a gift, much like every other luxury item in that apartment. I retrieved the keys, the house key, the car fob, even the small brass key to the wine cellar he'd always boasted about. I arranged them in a meticulous line on the counter, much like evidence laid out for inspection. "Let's find out," I stated, my voice calm. Then I turned and walked away, in the dress he'd bought me, into an elevator he paid for, and onto a street where, for the first time in 4 years and 3 months, no one was waiting to question my whereabouts. By the stroke of midnight, I was checking into a suite at the Havenwood. I paid in cash, my cash. Money I'd amassed by playing with stocks, as Julian liked to condescendingly call it at parties, usually just before one of his banker friends chuckled along. What none of them knew, what he had never bothered to discover, was that I'd transformed his paltry $10,000 monthly allowance into a staggering $4.3 million over 4 years. And what I knew, that he was utterly unaware I knew, was poised to dismantle his entire family legacy. I had been married to Julian Thorne for 4 years, 3 months, and 6 days when I stumbled upon the small voice recorder on the floor of his study. Let me be clear, I wasn't always this person, suspicious, calculating, meticulously gathering proof. When I met Julian, I was 26, working the front desk at a boutique hotel in a bustling city neighborhood, putting myself through night classes in finance. Numbers had always made sense to me, I was remarkably good with them, the kind of good that once made high school teachers wonder if I'd cheated. Julian first entered my life during a business dinner, which mostly consisted of him and Beckett Sterling, his lifelong friend from boarding school, getting excessively drunk on a Tuesday evening. He was charming, lavish with his attention. He remembered my name the second time he visited, then the third. Soon, he began requesting my specific attention. Then, he invited me to dinner, and within 8 months, I wore a ring that cost more than my childhood home. My mother, bless her, wept at the wedding, but they weren't tears of joy. She pulled me aside in the ladies' room of the Grand Regent and whispered, "Elara, darling, you don't owe anyone your entire life just because they bought you a piece of jewelry." I dismissed her, calling her dramatic. I was wrong. She was being a mother. The early warning signs were subtle enough to rationalize away. Julian managing my finances, so you don't have to concern yourself, dearest. Julian dictating my friendships, Vivian's circle simply offers better social connections for us. Julian's father, Alistair Thorne, the founder of Thorne Global Holdings, scrutinizing me across the Thanksgiving table as if I were a piece of furniture he was contemplating discarding. And then there was the allowance, $10,000 a month, deposited into an account he could view and close with a single phone call. "For your little diversions," he'd called it. My little diversion involved poring over 10K reports at 5 a.m. long before he awoke. My little diversion was a brokerage account established under my maiden name, one he never knew existed, opened the very week we married, funded by birthday checks from my grandmother I'd never mentioned to him. By the second year, that account held $340,000. By the fourth, it contained $4.1 million. I never told him. Partly because I cherished having something that was unequivocally mine, and partly, though I didn't fully acknowledge it at the time, because an instinctual part of me had begun packing a metaphorical go-bag in the recesses of my mind, long before I understood why. That particular Tuesday began like any other. Julian departed early for a meeting with his father. I was in the study searching for a charger when I accidentally knocked his leather briefcase from the desk. A small, black voice recorder clattered onto the hardwood floor and began to play. Julian's voice, mid-laughter, conversing with Beckett, that type is perfect. Pretty enough for photographs, simple enough to manipulate. I froze, the charger still in my grasp. Decorative beauty, rental intelligence, he'd quipped, and Beckett had roared with laughter as if it were the wittiest remark he'd ever heard. My stomach plummeted, yet my hands, strangely, remained steady. The shaking would come later. In that moment, I felt an eerie stillness, the way you feel just before a car crash when you see it unfolding, but your body hasn't yet registered the impact. I tried to tell myself it was a joke. Men spoke like that, didn't they? Locker room banter. He couldn't have meant me specifically. I repeated this internal mantra even as my thumb instinctively rewound the recording, listening to it 3 more times. Each playback made it sound less like a joke and more like a job description. My asterisk job description. I returned the recorder to its exact spot. Then, driven by a decision some nascent part of me had already made, I began to sift through the rest of his bag. That's where I discovered the folder, Post-Nuptial Agreement Amendment Number 2. My signature was on page 14. I have signed my name perhaps 10,000 times in my life. I know what my signature looks like when I'm tired, when I'm hurried, when I'm scribbling on a credit card receipt. This was none of those. The initial E had a loop at the bottom that my actual signature never possessed. I recognized it because I had noticed it once before, on a Christmas card to his mother that I hadn't written. I sank to the study floor, clutching a legal document that would have stripped me of the apartment, the car, and access to any joint accounts the moment and I quote because I read it 4 times, engaged in conduct detrimental to the Thorne family's reputation or business interests. Conduct detrimental. Vague enough to encompass anything, yet specific enough that I knew precisely who would be the arbiter of what constituted it. My hands finally started shaking then, catching up to the horror. My phone vibrated at 2:14 p.m. Unknown number. I possess 40 years of information you require. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. The Golden Dragon, Chinatown. Come alone. E. I should have been more terrified by that text than I was. In retrospect, I believe I had already crossed an invisible threshold in Julian's study. Nothing after that felt as frightening as it should have. The following day, at a discreet corner table in the Golden Dragon, surrounded by the aroma of soy sauce and the rhythmic clatter of woks, an elderly woman in her early 60s settled across from me. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe bun, reading glasses perched on a chain around her neck. Her posture exuded the quiet dignity of someone who had spent 4 decades in rooms where she was never meant to be truly seen. Eleanor Vance, she announced, sliding a tin of butter cookies across the table as if we were old friends meeting for afternoon tea. I served as Alastair Thorne's executive assistant for 38 years. Retired 8 months ago. Forced retirement, if we're being frank. They desired someone younger for the front desk. Inside the cookie tin was a tube of red lipstick. It was heavier than any lipstick should be. Flash drive, Eleanor stated, her gaze unwavering, her voice unlowered, which somehow made the situation even more unnerving. Do not open it here. 40 years of what? I pressed. Of everything, she replied. I began compiling records in 1982. Alastair's first wife, Clarice, perished in a car accident on Highway 17. Brakes failed. Perfect weather, dry road, no skid marks. She recited it with the detached tone one might use for a grocery list. The second wife, Evelyn, not the Evelyn you might know, was committed to a facility upstate for exhaustion in 1991. She remained there for 11 months, emerging a profoundly changed person. The third wife, Penelope, was arrested for embezzling from the family foundation in 1999. The charges were quietly dropped after she signed something. I have the something. She laid 4 photographs on the table, side by side, arranging them with the same precision I had used for my keys 2 days prior, though of course, I couldn't have known that then. 4 women, all fair-haired, all roughly the same height, similar build, and each bearing the same wide, trusting smile. They select wives like casting calls, Eleanor observed. Attractive, a touch insecure, no family wealth or legal backing. They're used for approximately 4 years. Long enough to be socially useful, not long enough to discover the hidden truths. Then they're discredited, removed, replaced, before they begin asking uncomfortable questions. A chill permeated me. You're at 4 years and 3 months, Eleanor said, and for the first time, her composure faltered, just a tremor at the corners of her eyes. I witnessed this unfold with 3 women I genuinely liked. I refused to watch it happen to a 4th. Act now, Elara. Whatever plans you've already conceived, execute them now, while you still have the chance. I hadn't confided in her about any plans. I didn't have to. Here's what I want people to comprehend. I didn't unleash a catastrophe that first week. I'm not foolish, despite Julian's apparent assertions to his acquaintances. Causing a dramatic scene leads to being discredited, or worse, having your post-nuptial agreement invoked on grounds of erratic behavior. So, I started small, $8,000 transferred from my brokerage account into a newly established LLC, Harlow Design Concepts, a name with no particular significance. It was registered in Delaware by a lawyer named Serena Rossi, who had spent 14 years at a white-collar defense firm before striking out on her own. She was recommended to me, of all people, by the concierge at the Havenwood, whom I had tipped generously enough over the years that she had strong opinions about discreet legal counsel. Interior design consulting fees, Serena mused, examining the paperwork in her small office on the 11th floor of a building downtown. All perfectly legal, all above board. No one questions a wife who suddenly cultivates a hobby business, especially one that appears to lose money on paper for its initial year. It's the oldest trick in the divorce preparation manual, and it works precisely because it's so utterly unremarkable. $12,000 more, 2 weeks later, than $20,000. I wasn't hiding money, I had been accumulating it for years. I was constructing a paper trail that would logically explain my access to these funds when the inevitable moment arrived. Meanwhile, Julian's world began to falter. Initially, I genuinely believed it had nothing to do with me. Two of Thorne Global Holdings' most significant clients withdrew their accounts within 10 days of each other. Then a third. At a dinner party I almost skipped, Serena had advised me to maintain appearances, act normal, document everything. I overheard Alastair Thorne on the phone in the hallway. His voice was low and seething. Tell them it's a rumor, Marcus. Tell them the SEC hasn't even. He cut off abruptly when he spotted me, offering the same dismissive smile he reserved for inanimate objects. He then retreated into the study and shut the door. I texted Eleanor that night. SEC rumors already, she replied within a minute. I initiated those 8 weeks ago. I have contacts in the compliance departments of 3 of those clients. I told you 40 years. I know precisely which dominoes to nudge. I should have been wary of Eleanor. Honestly, some nights I was. But mostly, I felt a peculiar, dizzying gratitude, the kind you feel towards a stranger who pulls you from oncoming traffic, a relief intertwined with the horrifying realization of how narrowly you escaped. 3 weeks in, Julian started returning home drunk. Not party drunk, but stress drunk. The kind where a man pours his third scotch with hands that refuse to cooperate, and signs whatever document is placed before him because reading it demands more focus than he possesses. I presented him with numerous documents. Among them, a power of attorney amendment, meticulously drafted by Serena, worded so subtly that it appeared to be a routine update to our existing trust documents. It granted me signing authority over 3 accounts I'd previously had no access to. He signed it at 11:40 p.m. on a Thursday, somewhere between his 4th and 5th scotch, while engrossed in highlights from a basketball game. What's this for again? He mumbled. Tax matter. Your accountant needs it by Friday, I replied. Signature secured. My phone, propped discreetly against a vase of lilies, had been recording every conversation in that apartment for 2.5 weeks. I had captured it all. 3 days later was the ladies' auxiliary luncheon at the University Club, an event I'd attended monthly for 4 years, mostly in silent observation while a revolving cast of Thorne-adjacent wives discussed renovations, nannies, and occasionally, me. Vivian Prescott had a particular routine. Her husband ran a pharmaceutical company, Aegis Pharma. Vivian possessed an MBA from Wharton, a fact she mentioned approximately every 11 minutes, and a habit of asking me, with a minuscule smile, how my cute little investment apps were faring. That day, I deliberately set down my fork. Actually, Vivian, I said, my portfolio is up 340% this year. I shorted Aegis Pharma last month, right before the patent rejection for Innova came through. Made a rather substantial return on that one, actually. I wish I could adequately describe the silence that followed, but words truly failed to capture it. 12 women, mid-chew, all ceased simultaneously. Somewhere, a fork clattered onto a plate. Vivian's face cycled through at least 4 different shades. You're jesting, she finally managed. I have the trade confirmations, if you'd care to see them, I offered, taking a measured sip of my sparkling water. And that was the last time anyone at that table ever made a joke about my cute little apps. I didn't realize at the moment how profoundly that lunch would resonate, but information travels through those circles faster than any SEC filing. By that evening, 3 different individuals had telephoned Julian, asking with thinly veiled glee if his wife had genuinely shorted Vivian Prescott's husband's company. By the next morning, Alastair Thorne had also heard about it. And Alastair Thorne did not appreciate being publicly reminded that the simple trophy wife had quietly amassed a fortune using information his own exclusive circle had failed to foresee. I didn't know it yet, but that lunch marked the first visible crack in Julian's carefully constructed facade in public. Before that, whatever transpired in our marriage remained within our marriage. After that, people began to watch. The next blow didn't originate from me at all, and it unnerved me more than anything I had personally orchestrated, because it signified that the dominoes were toppling faster than I could track. Clara Sterling, Beckett's wife, a quiet, unassuming woman I had always rather liked, whom I'd assumed was oblivious to everything, filed for divorce with undeniable proof. Eleanor procured the filing for me before it even became public record. It turns out 38 years as an executive assistant means you cultivate connections with paralegals at every firm within a 6-block radius. Clara's lawyer had included, as an exhibit, a series of emails exchanged between Julian and Beckett from 18 months prior. I read them standing in the penthouse bathroom, the door locked, my back pressed against the cool tiles because I couldn't trust my legs to support me anywhere else. In the emails, Julian and Beckett discussed, with chilling casualness, the way one might discuss a fantasy football trade, what would occur once Beckett's situation resolves itself. Julian, the emails indicated, would look out for Clara if anything befell Beckett. There was a jest about life insurance. There was a joke, that wasn't truly a joke, about how Clara's family trust would make a nice addition to certain portfolios. I remained on that bathroom floor for 40 minutes. Then I rose, splashed water on my face, and printed everything. I purchased a cheap brown wig and a department store dress 2 sizes too large from a discount store in Queens. I paid in cash, no digital trace. I donned sunglasses I already owned. And on a Thursday afternoon, I entered the lobby of Beckett Sterling's office building, a building I had visited a dozen times as Julian's wife, where the doorman had never given me a second glance. This time, in my disguise, no one looked at me at all. I slid a sealed envelope under the door of the executive offices, addressed personally to Beckett, containing copies of the same emails Clara's lawyer had filed, plus 3 additional ones that hadn't yet made it into the court filing, which Eleanor had unearthed from a forgotten backup server. 3 hours later, my phone, which I'd left strategically propped against the lily vase, picked up Julian's end of a phone call so loud I could hear it from the kitchen. Beckett, what the hell are you? A pause. That's not what those say. Another, longer pause. Beckett, Beckett. The call ended. Julian remained absolutely still for a long moment, staring at his phone. The Thorne-Sterling partnership, 22 years strong, the very cornerstone of Julian's professional identity, was dissolved by the close of business. That night, after Julian departed to confront Beckett, returning 3 hours and 2 bars later, reeking of bourbon and barely able to locate the bedroom, I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop and a legal pad. I dialed the number Serena had given me 3 weeks earlier. It rang twice. SEC Office of the Whistleblower. This is Agent Sophia Reyes. I would later discover that Agent Reyes had spent 11 years prosecuting securities fraud at the U.S. Attorney's Office before transitioning to the Commission, and that she had, by her own later admission, received perhaps 4 tips in a decade that arrived with as much organized documentation as the one I provided that night. I need to report systematic insider trading at Thorne Global Holdings, I articulated, my voice steadier than I felt. 5 years of trade data cross-referenced with non-public information concerning client mergers, FDA decisions, and earnings reports. I possess timestamped trade confirmations that align with internal memos by date, sometimes by the hour. Ma'am, may I ask how you obtained? I am Alastair Thorne's daughter-in-law. I've been married to his son for 4 years. I've had access to this apartment, his study, and 40 years of records meticulously kept by his former executive assistant, who is prepared to be a named source. I drew a breath. I'm sending the files to this email address right now. Trade logs, internal memos, audio recordings of conversations discussing the timing of specific trades relative to confidential client information. It's approximately 1,400 pages. There was a distinct pause on the line. I could hear typing. Ma'am, Agent Reyes stated, her voice having shifted, becoming careful and acutely focused in a way that signaled she was already beginning to believe me. I'm going to need you not to delete anything, and I'm going to need a callback number where I can reach you tomorrow morning that isn't this one. You'll have it, I replied. One more thing. There's also a cold case. A car accident on Highway 17 in upstate New York, 1982. Brake failure, no skid marks, ruled accidental. I don't know if that falls under your jurisdiction, but someone should re-examine it. Alastair Thorne's first wife. The line remained silent for a beat. I'll ensure that information reaches the appropriate department, Agent Reyes confirmed. I didn't sleep. I packed instead, quietly, methodically, as one would if they had been mentally rehearsing it for months, which I realized, as I zipped the final bag, I apparently had. 3 suitcases. My laptop, with everything meticulously backed up to a drive Eleanor had helped me set up under a different name. My passport, my real one, the one with my maiden name on the supplemental ID page that Julian never knew I'd kept current. The lipstick flash drive. A printed copy of the post-nuptial agreement with my forged signature highlighted, accompanied by Serena's notarized analysis. I walked through the penthouse one last time at 3:04 a.m. The skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows looked precisely as it had 4 years prior, the night Julian proposed on this very balcony, with this very view, both of us slightly intoxicated by champagne and the illusion of each other. Julian was sprawled in his study, head resting on the desk, a faint trail of drool pooling on a stack of documents that, I happened to know, included 3 different drafts of merger paperwork, now residing in an SEC evidence file with my name attached as the whistleblower. I removed my engagement ring and wedding band, placing them on the kitchen counter beside the keys. I'd instructed Mateo, the night doorman, to collect them in the morning. I slipped off the diamond earrings he'd given me for our 3rd anniversary and set those down as well. The dress I was wearing I left, changing into a pair of jeans and a sweater I'd purchased myself with my own money the year before, folded neatly on a chair. I then penned a note, just 2 words, on the back of one of his own business cards, because I thought there was a certain poetic justice to it, check your accounts. I left it atop the keys. Then I picked up my 3 suitcases and walked out of the apartment, down the elevator, past Mateo, who had worked there for 19 years and whom I tipped generously every Christmas. He glanced at my luggage and simply murmured, very softly, "Good luck, Mrs. Thorne." I stepped into a cab headed for a hotel suite I had booked under my maiden name 3 days earlier with my own money, just in case. At 7:03 a.m., my phone illuminated. "Julian, what is this? What does this mean?" "Ilara, call me." I didn't call him. I drank coffee from room service and watched the second hand on the clock tick past 7:04, 7:05, 7:06. By 7:15, he'd called 9 times. I know because I counted, the way you count something you've been waiting 4 years to count. By 9 a.m., the calls had taken on a different tone, less anger, more bewildered confusion. I imagined him standing in the kitchen, clutching my note, holding his phone, then opening his banking app, and then opening it again, surely convinced there was an error. It wasn't an error. The power of attorney amendment he'd signed 3 nights earlier, the tax thing, had, among other provisions, granted me authority to act on 3 joint accounts that, as it transpired, contained not only our shared money but also a significant portion of Julian's personal trading capital, the kind he kept liquid for rapid positions. At 6:58 a.m., 5 minutes before his first text, Serena had executed a court-approved emergency asset freeze on those accounts, filed the previous night the moment I called Agent Reyes, on the grounds that the funds were potential proceeds of securities fraud and needed to be preserved pending investigation. I hadn't taken his money. I had merely ensured that neither of us could access it until the SEC declared otherwise, which, given the contents of those 1,400 pages, was going to be a very, very long time. By noon, his voicemails had shifted again. I listened to one, sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed, hugging a pillow, my stomach churning with nerves, even though, especially though, I had meticulously planned every aspect of this. "Ilara, please." His voice was raw, broken in a way I had genuinely never heard before, not in 4 years. "The FBI is here. They're going through Dad's office. There are people in the lobby with. Ilara, please. I don't understand what's happening. Please call me back." I deleted the voicemail. Then I turned on the television. It was the lead story on every local channel by 6 p.m. Alastair Thorne, founder of Thorne Global Holdings, arrested in multi-agency fraud investigation. The footage displayed Alastair, 71 years old, silver-haired, always impeccably composed at every family dinner I'd ever endured, being led out of his Connecticut mansion in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents. Behind him, more agents carried out box after box of files, the kind of boxes one usually only sees in movies. Except this time, Eleanor Vance had spent 8 months quietly assembling precisely what was contained within them. A reporter, I later learned his name was Miles Griffin, 15 years covering white-collar crime for the Wall Street Journal, stood outside the federal building that evening, and I watched him utter something that made me set down my coffee. Sources inform us that this investigation extends beyond securities fraud, into at least one cold case from 1982 that is being reopened by the state police, involving the death of Thorne's first wife. We are also told the whistleblower in this case is a member of the Thorne family by marriage. I switched off the television. My phone buzzed. "Eleanor, it's done. They'll be sifting through this for years. Clarissa's case has been reassigned to a cold case unit. A detective named Wallace, good reputation, actually cares. I'll send you her contact if you want updates." "You did good, kid." I cried then. The first time since I discovered that recorder 3 weeks, a lifetime, ago. Not from sadness. I genuinely don't know what the tears were for. Relief, perhaps, or grief for the version of me that had spent 4 years believing $10,000 a month and a $6 million view represented the zenith of her aspirations. 3 weeks later, 21 days to be exact, though I wasn't deliberately counting, I promise, I was at the bar of the Astor with Serena, celebrating the formal nullification of the postnuptial agreement. The forged signature had been unequivocally confirmed by a forensic document examiner named Dr. Evelyn Reed, who, with 22 years in forensic handwriting analysis, had produced a report running 11 pages and employing the phrase, inconsistent with the subject's established signature pattern, so many times it briefly became our private joke. That's when Julian walked in. I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. There was a patch of gray at his temple I was fairly certain hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. His suit, the same tailored, expensive kind he'd worn every day of our marriage, looked as though it had been slept in, because, as I would later learn, it had. "You destroyed everything," he choked out, his voice cracking on the last word. The bar had fallen silent around us, the way rooms inexplicably do. "I revealed everything," I corrected. "There's a difference." He opened his mouth, I think to utter something about lawyers, about the divorce, about the accounts, the kind of pronouncements he would have made with absolute conviction 3 weeks prior, the voice of a man who had never truly been told no, but nothing emerged, because he knew, and I knew, and everyone in that bar who had followed the news that week knew, that there was nothing left for him to threaten me with. No accounts to freeze, no reputation of mine left to ruin, because mine had only ever existed in relation to his, and now his didn't exist at all. You said I wouldn't survive a week without you, I remarked. I picked up my glass. Champagne, the finest kind, paid for with money I'd earned reading 10K reports at 5 a.m. while he slept off whatever he'd indulged in the night before. It's been 21 days. I took a sip. And you're the one drowning. Two men in dark suits, hotel security I presumed, though I never actually inquired, appeared at Julian's elbows with a quiet efficiency that suggested someone had anticipated their need. He began to argue, started to say something about legal representation, and, who do you think you are? But his voice was already fading as they escorted him towards the door, out into the kind of evening where, for the first time in his life, no one was going to fix anything for him. The bartender, a woman named Brenda, I would find out, who had worked that bar for 6 years and had, by her own admission later, served Julian Thorne more drinks than she could count, set a fresh glass down in front of me without being asked. On the house, she said. That was long overdue. I still think about Eleanor sometimes. Eleanor Vance, who spent 38 years quietly cataloging the most egregious transgressions a powerful family could commit, waiting for someone who might actually utilize it. She eventually testified in both the SEC case and the reopened investigation into Clarice Thorne's death. Detective Wallace, the cold case detective Eleanor connected me with, informed me last month that the brake line failure on Clarice's car in 1982 had, according to a mechanic's notes Eleanor had meticulously preserved for 43 years, been serviced 2 days before the accident by a shop that permanently closed 3 weeks later. Its owner had received a substantial payment from a Thorne family account that same week. It's an active investigation, Detective Wallace cautioned. I can't disclose more than that. But I believe soon, Clarice Thorne will finally receive what no one afforded her in 1982, someone asking genuine questions. Alastair Thorne is currently out on bail, awaiting trial on 11 counts of securities fraud and facing a separate grand jury proceeding related to Clarice's death. Thorne Global Holdings no longer exists, the SEC revoked its registration 4 months ago. Beckett Sterling settled with Clara for an amount that, according to Eleanor, who still seems to possess knowledge of everyone and everything, made his lawyers weep. Julian and I divorced quietly. There wasn't much to contest, as most of what would have been ours was either frozen, seized, or never legally his to begin with. He relocated to his mother's residence in Florida. I heard secondhand that he's actually working, a sales job, the kind of job he used to mock at dinner parties. I don't feel triumphant about that, not exactly. Mostly, I feel something quieter. Something akin to the silence after a long, loud room finally empties.